trapped in the Colorado mountains after my car plunged off an icy road. I wasn't supposed to survive the night, let alone 73 hours in sub-zero temperatures with a fractured leg and no help coming. But death, as it turns out, is surprisingly easy to outrun when you have no other choice. This wasn't how my winter break was supposed to start. I've always heard that in life-or-death situations, your survival instincts kick in and override everything else. That's bullshit. My first coherent thought wasn't some heroic plan to save myself. It was pure, undiluted regret. Regret for ignoring the weather alerts. Regret for taking the scenic route through the mountains instead of the longer interstate. Regret for thinking my California driving experience prepared me for Colorado in December. I had no idea then that the next 73 hours would push me beyond anything I thought possible, that I would learn exactly how far the human body and mind can stretch before breaking. I didn't know that statistically, I was already dead. 6 hours earlier, I had been cruising out of Denver with the confidence of a 21-year-old who'd just aced his fall semester finals. The rental car agency had upgraded me to an SUV, something about holiday goodwill, and I felt invincible behind the wheel of the Toyota 4Runner. The forecast mentioned snow, but growing up in Northern California, I figured I knew what snow meant. A dusting. Maybe an inch or two. Dude, you sure about driving through the mountains tonight? My roommate Tyler's voice had crackled through my car speakers. The Weather Channel is saying it's going to get real nasty out there. It'll be fine, I replied, the ultimate phrase of the doomed. I'll be through the pass before the real stuff hits. Besides, this thing's got four-wheel drive. The irony wasn't lost on me now as I fumbled with numb fingers to unbuckle my seatbelt. Four-wheel drive doesn't help when you hit a patch of black ice at 40 miles per hour and veer off into a ravine. The car had rolled at least twice before coming to rest against a stand of pines, driver's side up, thank God. But we were well off the road. How far? I couldn't tell through the darkness and snow. My phone showed no service, as expected. The last mile marker I remembered seeing was 67, which put me somewhere in the middle of absolutely nowhere, at least 30 miles from the next town in either direction. The highway above wasn't exactly the interstate. It was a scenic byway that saw maybe a car every half hour during good weather. In a snowstorm at 9 p.m., I might as well have crashed on Mars. The temperature gauge on my dashboard read 17 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. I tried the engine. Nothing but a sad clicking noise. The battery might have survived, but something in the engine had not. The heater was gone, and with it, my most immediate source of survival. Wilderness survival had never been my thing. I was a computer science major, more comfortable debugging code than starting fires. But I remembered reading somewhere that in situations like this, you should stay with your vehicle. It provides shelter, is easier to spot than a lone person, and conserves your energy. So I waited and waited. The first hour passed with me flashing my lights whenever I thought I heard a vehicle above, though the sound never materialized in headlights. The second hour saw me rummaging through my luggage, layering every piece of clothing I had packed for my 2-week winter break. The third hour was spent calculating and recalculating my odds, each math problem ending with the same answer. Not good. By hour 4, the temperature inside the car had dropped to match the outside. My breaths came out in thick plumes, and the windows were frosted from the inside. I had found half a bottle of water and some forgotten trail mix in my backpack. Enough to stave off immediate hunger, but nowhere near enough for an extended wait. The snow had piled up around the car, nearly covering the windows. If another car did pass by on the road above, they wouldn't see me unless they were specifically looking for a vehicle in the ravine. As dawn approached, I had to face the reality of my situation. No one knew exactly where I was. I had told my parents I'd be leaving Denver sometime after lunch and arriving probably before midnight. They gave them a window of about 12 hours before they'd even begin to worry. And even then, the search area would be enormous, hundreds of miles of mountain roads. I had two choices: stay with the car and hope someone would find me before hypothermia set in, or try to make it back to the highway and flag down help. Both options seemed equally likely to end with me as a cautionary tale on some wilderness survival show. The first rays of sunlight reveal my situation more clearly, and it wasn't reassuring. My car had tumbled down a steep slope, coming to rest in a small clearing surrounded by dense pine forest. The highway was visible, barely, about 200 feet up a rocky, snow-covered incline. It might as well have been 2,000 feet for how difficult that climb would be in my condition. My leg throbbed where it had collided with the dashboard, and dried blood caked the left side of my face. Nothing seemed broken, but the pain made movement difficult. Still, I forced myself to take inventory of what I had. One nearly dead phone, a backpack with some books and my laptop, half a bottle of water, a small bag of trail mix, the clothes I was wearing plus an extra hoodie, a beanie, and my winter coat. No flashlight, no matches, no emergency kit. Because who needs those, right? After another 2 hours without seeing a single vehicle pass on the highway above, I made my decision. The car was becoming an ice box, and my extremities were starting to lose feeling despite all my layers. If I stayed, I would freeze to death. If I tried to make it to the highway, I at least had a chance. I stuffed everything useful into my backpack, wrapped my scarf around my face, and forced the passenger door open against the accumulated snow. The cold hit me like a physical force, stealing my breath and making my eyes water. The snow was nearly knee-deep, and each step was a struggle. But I pushed forward, angling toward what looked like the least steep path up to the highway. The first fall happened about 20 feet from the car. My injured leg gave out, and I tumbled face first into the snow. Getting up was harder than I expected, my limbs already stiff from cold and injury. The second fall came as I tried to climb over a fallen log. The third happened on a particularly steep section, sending me sliding back down nearly to where I had started. By midday, I had made progress, maybe halfway to the highway, but the effort had cost me. I was sweating beneath my layers, a dangerous condition in the cold. My water was gone, and the hunger had become a constant companion. Worse, the clouds had thickened again, and fresh snow was beginning to fall. I reached the highway just as the daylight began to fade, exhausted and in more pain than I'd ever experienced. The road stretched empty in both directions, not a single tire track breaking the fresh snow. It was as if civilization had simply ceased to exist. Logic told me to follow the road downhill. Water flows downhill, and people tend to live where water is. But downhill would take me deeper into the mountains before eventually reaching a town. Uphill would take me back toward the pass and eventually to a ski resort area where there would definitely be people, but it was much further. I chose downhill, each step a negotiation with my failing body. Night fell quickly in the mountains, and with it came a bone-deep cold that made the previous night seem mild by comparison. The snow was falling more heavily now, reducing visibility to just a few feet. I kept to the edge of the road, ready to dive into the snowbank if a car appeared, though none did. Walking became an automatic function, my mind detached from the mechanical movement of my legs. One foot, then the other. Don't stop. Stopping means death. The mantra repeated in my mind as the hours stretched on. I don't remember falling. One moment I was walking, and the next I was face down in the snow, too exhausted to get up. The cold had become almost comfortable, a dangerous sign I recognized even in my deteriorating mental state. Hypothermia makes you feel warm before it kills you. Another fun fact from some wilderness show I'd watched from the safety of my dorm room couch. With what felt like superhuman effort, I pushed myself back to my feet. I needed shelter, something to block the wind and snow. The moon occasionally broke through the clouds, providing just enough light to see the dense forest running alongside the road. Shelter would be there, not in the exposed roadway. I stumbled into the trees, searching for anything, a hollow log, a cluster of pines, even a depression in the ground. What I found was almost too good to be true, a small structure, man-made, barely visible through the swirling snow. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a Forest Service cabin, the kind used by rangers during fire season. It was locked, of course, but one of the windows had a broken latch, and in my desperation, I had no moral qualms about breaking and entering. The interior was bare, a small table, a couple of chairs, a wood stove, and not much else. but it was out of the wind and snow, and that alone made it paradise. There was no wood inside, but I found a small stack on the covered porch, left by whoever had used the cabin last. My frozen fingers struggled with the matches I found in a drawer, but eventually I managed to get a small fire going in the stove. The heat was meager but real, and for the first time in over 24 hours, I felt a tiny sliver of hope. A thorough search of the cabin revealed several life-saving treasures: a first aid kit, a few cans of beans and corn, a flashlight with working batteries, and most valuable of all, a map. It wasn't detailed, just a simple Forest Service map showing major roads, ranger stations, and landmarks, but it confirmed what I had guessed. I was about 18 miles from the nearest town. 18 miles. Under normal conditions, that would be a long day's hike. In my condition, through deep snow and freezing temperatures, it might as well have been 100. I allowed myself 1 can of beans that night, eating them cold because I couldn't wait for them to heat up. The food gave me strength, and the relative warmth of the cabin allowed me to drift into an exhausted sleep. The morning brought clear skies, but even colder temperatures. According to my phone, which I had kept off to preserve the battery, it was 5 degrees Fahrenheit outside, the coldest day of the winter so far. But the clear weather meant visibility, and visibility meant a chance of being seen if any vehicles passed by. I faced a new dilemma: stay in the relative safety of the cabin and hope for rescue, or continue toward town while I still had some strength. The map had shown another ranger station about 8 miles ahead. If I could make it there, it might have a radio or satellite phone. The memory of those 24 hours in the cabin is hazy. I slept, I paced, I rationalized both staying and going. In the end, the decision was made for me when I realized the wood supply wouldn't last another night. I could either freeze in the cabin or take my chances on the move. I left at first light the next morning, taking everything useful from the cabin. The clear sky was both blessing and curse. No fresh snow to struggle through, but the sun reflected blindingly off the white ground, and the temperature remained brutally low. The going was slow, each mile an exercise in pain management and stubborn determination. My injured leg had stiffened overnight, and while the bleeding on my face had stopped, the wound pulled uncomfortably as the skin tightened in the cold. By midday, I had covered perhaps 4 miles, half of what I had hoped for. The sun provided little warmth, but its position helped me keep track of time and direction. According to the map, the road should soon curve eastward, following a river valley down toward more populated areas. The first sign of the river was the sound, a gentle rushing beneath the otherwise silent landscape. The road indeed curved to follow it, and for the first time, I noticed occasional evidence of human presence. A survey marker, remnants of an old campsite, boot prints partially filled with snow that had to be at least a few days old. I was so focused on these small signs of civilization that I nearly missed the movement on the ridge above me. When I finally registered it, my heart nearly stopped. Not human, animal, large, moving with the confident gait of a predator. Mountain lion. The thought froze me more effectively than the cold ever could. They rarely attack humans, I reminded myself. But injured, isolated humans? That might be a different story. I never saw it clearly, just the tawny movement among the trees and rocks. But knowing it was there, possibly tracking me, added a new dimension of fear to my already precarious situation. I picked up a sturdy branch to use as both walking stick and potential weapon, though I harbored no illusions about my chances against a mountain lion. Whether it lost interest or was never interested in the first place, the mountain lion eventually disappeared from my awareness. But the encounter left me shaken and even more aware of my vulnerability. The afternoon waned, and with it my strength. I had covered perhaps 7 miles total, still short of the ranger station I was aiming for. The temperature was dropping rapidly as sunset approached, and I knew I needed shelter soon. The river offered the first real break in my journey. As I rounded a bend in the road, I spotted a bridge spanning the water. Beneath it, protected from snow and wind, was a small area of dry ground. Not ideal, but better than nothing. I scrambled down the embankment, nearly falling in my haste to reach the sheltered area. It was as cold as everywhere else, but at least it blocked the wind. I gathered what drywood I could find and, using the last of my matches, managed to start a small fire. The flames were pitiful, but they were real. I huddled as close as I dared, letting the minimal heat thaw my frozen extremities. I still had 1 can of corn and a few handfuls of trail mix, enough for one more day if I rationed carefully. Sleep came in brief, uncomfortable bursts. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the rush of the river, the call of a night bird, jolted me awake, heart racing. By morning, I was exhausted, cold, and in more pain than before. But I was alive, and the ranger station was supposedly just a mile or two ahead. I never made it to the ranger station. About a mile from my makeshift camp, as I trudged along the increasingly visible road, the unthinkable happened. I slipped on an icy patch and tumbled down the steep embankment toward the river. The fall wasn't far, perhaps 15 feet, but the landing was catastrophic. I crashed through the thin ice at the river's edge, plunging into water so cold it felt like fire. Pure instinct got me out of the water and onto the snowy bank. But the damage was done. My clothes were soaked, the temperature was well below freezing, and I was now separated from the road by a steep, icy slope. Hypothermia would kill me within hours, minutes, even if I couldn't get dry and warm. In what I can only describe as the most primal survival mode, I stripped off my wet outer layers and wrung them out as best I could. My hand were too numb to work the zipper on my backpack, so I tore it open, searching for anything dry. My extra hoodie had stayed mostly dry in the center of the pack. It wasn't much, but it was something. I knew what I needed to do. Every survival show I'd ever watched flashed through my mind. Body heat dries clothes. I needed to put the wet layers closest to my skin, then the dry layer over them. It went against every instinct, but I did it, wincing as the freezing fabric touched my skin. Then I moved. I didn't try to climb back to the road. That slope was a death trap. Instead, I followed the river, moving as fast as my injured body would allow. Movement generates heat. Heat dries clothes and prevents hypothermia. Keep moving or die. I don't know how long I walked along that riverbank. Time became meaningless, measured only in steps and breaths. My clothes gradually went from soaking to merely damp, but the cold had penetrated to my core. My thoughts grew sluggish, and more than once I caught myself stopping, staring blankly at the rushing water. The farm appeared like a mirage, so unexpected that at first I thought I was hallucinating. A cluster of buildings nestled in a small valley where the river widened. Smoke rose from a chimney. Lights glowed in windows. Civilization. Getting there required the last reserves of my strength. I had to climb back up to the road, which had descended to meet the valley, and then stagger the final quarter mile to the farm's driveway. I must have looked like death itself. Bloody, filthy, half-frozen, as I pounded on the farmhouse door. The door opened to reveal an elderly man, his expression shifting from annoyance to shock as he took in my appearance. "Jesus Christ," was all he said before pulling me inside. What followed was a blur of warmth, dry clothes, hot soup, and eventually the wail of an ambulance siren. The farmer, Harold Baker, I later learned, had taken one look at me and called 911. His wife had wrapped me in blankets and force-fed me soup while they waited for the ambulance to navigate the rural roads. The paramedics later told me that my core temperature had dropped to 93 degrees Fahrenheit, well in a moderate hypothermia. I had frostbite on several toes and the tips of my ears. The gash on my forehead required 12 stitches. My minor leg injury turned out to be a hairline fracture of my tibia. But I was alive. 73 hours after my car had spun off that mountain road. I was alive when all odds said I should be dead. Recovery was slow. Physical therapy for my leg. Treatment for the frostbite. Counseling for the PTSD that manifested in nightmares and panic attacks whenever temperatures dropped or snow began to fall. My parents flew out immediately, of course. My mother cried for days. My father, normally stoic, hugged me for so long in the hospital that a nurse eventually had to ask him to let go so she could check my vitals. "Do you know how lucky you are?" the doctor asked during one of my checkups. The search teams were looking in the wrong area entirely. If you hadn't made it to that farm when you did, he didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew exactly how the story could have ended. It's been 5 years since those 73 hours. I graduated, got a job with a tech company in Denver. Yes, Denver. The mountains that nearly killed me now frame my daily view. Some might call that masochistic, but for me, it's a reminder, not just of how quickly life can turn, though that's certainly part of it, but more importantly, of what we're capable of when there's no other choice. The human will to survive is not some abstract concept from wilderness documentaries. It's a tangible force that can push a body far beyond what should be possible. I still have the map from that ranger cabin framed on my wall. Sometimes when life gets overwhelming, deadlines loom, relationships strain, the ordinary stresses of adulthood pile up, I look at that map and the red line I've drawn to mark my journey. 18 miles through snow and cold, injured and alone. If I could survive that, I can survive anything. And so can you. Whatever mountain you're facing, whatever cold is seeping into your bones, keep moving. One foot then the other. Don't stop. Stopping means death. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.